shadows of a seemingly perfect college town.
This was the ultimate nightmare for parents who are sending their kids off to college. In the space of 3 days, we have 5 students dead.
Danny Rolling lived a really unhappy life. He was a tortured soul since birth. Danny, aka the Gainesville Ripper, passed on the horrifying abuse that he had endured onto his victims. And over the course of 4 days, serial killer Danny terrorized the college students of Gainesville, Florida in a killing spree. After his crimes, a few years later, in 1996, Wes Craven unleashed a new slasher film. This was called Scream, which flipped horror on its ear and launched a new franchise. This film was written by Calvin Williamson, who drew his inspiration from Danny's killing spree. Hello and welcome back to Crime, Mystery and Mayhem with Kate. If this is your first visit to my channel, hello, welcome. It's great to have you here. Here on my channel, I talk about true crime stories. I find them interesting and I'm quite intrigued as to why some people do the horrible things that they do. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel because it would really help me in my attempts to grow my channel. I cannot do this without you guys. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about another serial killer. This is the story of Danny Rolling, aka the Gainesville Ripper. But first, there is a warning. It's a pretty horrible case. I'll be talking about some pretty gruesome crimes. There will be talk of SA, mutilation, self-harm, abuse towards children, and cruelty to an animal. If these are topics that may trigger you, please click out and come back with a different case. It's going to be horrific. Alright, and with that, let's jump into today's story. So Danny Harold Rolling was born on May the 26th, 1954 to Claudia and James Rolling in Louisiana. Unfortunately for Danny, his dad, he never wanted kids and would make that extremely clear throughout Danny's childhood. Very clear. James and Claudia Rolling got married when Claudia was only 19 years old and she got pregnant really quick, within a couple of weeks, much to James's disgust. He was not impressed. James was a cop and he consistently abused his wife and his children. Danny was only actually 1 year old when his dad abused him for the first time. They're still a baby when they're 1. He is a horrible man. He beat this 1 year old because apparently he wasn't learning to crawl properly. It's just disgusting, honestly. I told you it's a horrific story. And we're not even talking about the killer. This is just the father. So when Kevin, Danny's younger brother, was born in 1955, the abuse only got worse. This guy did not want kids. Claudia did try to escape this toxic marriage, but time and time again she would return. When Danny failed the 3rd grade for too many absences due to being sick, his mum had a nervous breakdown. She was so concerned by how their father would react. Danny's school counselors described him as suffering from an inferiority complex with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control. Those aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control would foreshadow his future murderous career. James was a horrible person. I've said that. And he would tell Danny often that he was an unwanted child. That's enough to destroy any child. This kid, he really did not stand a chance. Danny was James's main victim at home, and one day he actually pinned his son to the ground, handcuffed him, and had his co-workers at the local police department take him away. Horrible. All because he was embarrassed of him. He didn't actually do anything. He was just embarrassed of him. Also, Danny and his brother weren't allowed to celebrate their birthdays or holidays. Their mum still got a Christmas tree, but, James wasn't happy about it. It just really breaks my heart because I remember having so many birthday parties and amazing Christmases throughout my childhood, and it's just sad to think that these children, they didn't get that. It's horrible. It's really horrible. So not only were the children not allowed to have birthdays or holidays, but they never ever got an affectionate word or action from their dad. Ever. He was horrible. In fact, when the family got a dog, this is that thing I was saying about the animal abuse. Yeah, this is it. Click out if you need to. So they got a dog. James did not like it. Danny loved the dog. And sadly, James would beat this dog on a regular occasion, and it ended up dying in Danny's arms. Absolutely horrendous. I hate cruelty to animals, and to think of the pain that that poor dog went through, it just, oh my god. I just don't understand how anyone can hurt an innocent animal. Okay, I need to move on from that. I'm not going to stay on that. So the children would make their dad special gifts because they were trying to impress him. They wanted praise. They wanted to feel some sort of love. But instead, no. They'd hand him these gifts. He would say, oh, it's okay. And then he would point out all the negative parts about this gift. So, you know, they would paint him a picture or make him something, and he would just be like, you know, it's horrible. I love getting my special handmade gifts from my children. They put so much effort into them because they love me. And I just don't understand how any parent can reject their child's gifts. It's really sad. Danny and his brother were also not allowed to show any emotion. There were no hugs, no love, no affection. So sad. Danny's mum, she loved her kids, but she was scared to show affection because of her husband. Both boys were also suffering from nightmares, understandably, and Danny would dream about monsters and about terrible things happening to him. The dreams, they lasted for years for these kids. Later, he would say that he was plagued by demons, and he once told his mum that he had another person inside him. He said that this person was evil and wanted to inflict pain on others. Terrifying. Also, his dad once held a knife to his throat and twice threatened to shoot him. This is all still while he's a kid. My thoughts are, if he didn't want to have kids, if he didn't want to be a dad, you know, like, leave. You know, when she got pregnant, just leave. That's fine. It saves the kids from going through this shit. Why put his family through this constant abuse? It's horrible what these kids and Claudia went through. It wasn't just Danny, though. It was all of them. James would beat and threaten his other son and his wife. And by the time Danny was 11, he had picked up music. He picked this up because it helped him cope with the abuse that his father kept inflicting on him. He played guitar and he sang hymn-like songs. Claudia would leave her husband 15 or 20 times, and each time her sons, they begged her not to take him back. But she believed that marriage was forever, and she always went back. Claudia was battling internally herself. She wanted her sons to feel loved, but that was never going to happen with a husband like hers. She needed to get away. But yeah, sadly, it was too late by the time she got away. She started to self-harm and was actually committed to a hospital after she slit her wrists. This poor woman. Claudia later said that her husband made her cut herself with a razor blade. I don't know if that's true, but it could be. Danny then started to take drugs, and he drank a lot, which only worsened his already fragile mental state. So when Danny was 14, his neighbour actually called him peeping into their daughter's bedroom. Of course, his dad found out and beat him. Yeah. So he started, you know, acting a bit funny. He would do shoplifting and peeping in on people. Danny would actually run away from home quite often, and he would go camp in the woods to get away from his dad. As a teenager, he was arrested several times for robberies in Georgia and Alabama, and he was caught spying on many women getting dressed in their homes. Like, you should be able to dress in your own home, right? No, this guy was watching. A few years later, Danny enlisted into the Navy, but the Navy wouldn't take him, so he joined the Air Force. But the military didn't really help him. He eventually quit the Air Force after too much drug use, which included taking acid more than 100 times. Somehow he managed to get an honourable discharge after serving 2 years, and his commanding officer actually told his mum that he was not mature enough for the military. So following his discharge from the military, Danny managed to marry and begin what appeared to be a normal life. He even had a daughter. Then the cycle of abuse continued. When he was 23, after being with his wife for 4 years, she left him. She'd had enough. He was too much. He threatened to kill her, and she got out of there. This was in 1977, and she didn't allow him to see their child, which is fair enough. Danny turned his devastation into anger, and he R-worded a woman who closely resembled his ex-wife. Later that year, he killed a woman in a car accident, which troubled him further. As an adult, he had trouble trying to fit into society, and even though he tried, he just could not seem to hold down a job. Claudia, his mum, she really cared about her kids, but she was trapped in this abusive marriage still. She tried to get Danny help. She wanted him to get some psychological help, but James wouldn't let her. He said he's fine. He's not fine. Danny was never fine. Then, one day in August of 1990, Claudia had just got home from work, and she could tell that something had happened between James and Danny. Danny had moved back in with his parents, because apparently they were both really tense. So she went over to talk to her son about what was going on, and as he put his foot on the bench to tie his shoelace, his dad walked in, and he started yelling at him. But this time, it was different. Danny wasn't going to take this anymore. He was an adult now. He didn't need to put up with his dad's abuse, so he argued back. James then went to the back of the house and he returned with a gun. Danny ran out of the back door and his dad followed him. Claudia heard 3 shots outside and she thought that her son was dead. Yeah. So her husband returned alone and she was like, oh my God, like my son. But Danny did walk in, and at that time, he was the one holding the gun. So there must have been a scuffle, and he got the gun off his dad. Claudia was terrified. She knew that Danny was going to shoot her husband. She covered her eyes, and just before the gunshots began, she fled to her bedroom. There were 5 shots fired, and then it went silent. She thought that both her husband and her son must have been killed. When she returned to the kitchen, she found James. He was laying on the floor. He was still conscious, despite a bullet being lodged in his head. And she called for an ambulance and the police. James survived the shooting, and Danny was unharmed. Now Danny was wanted for attempted murder, and he fled Louisiana, staying briefly in Florida. While he was in Florida, he broke into the home of a lady called Janet Frake, and he R-worded her. Janet managed to calm the situation and got Danny to just leave and not kill her, which is amazing, considering what he goes on to do later. He was wearing a mask during this attack, and he was never charged with this crime. Then in late August of 1990, Danny headed to Gainesville. When he arrived, he set up a campsite in the woods just outside of town, kind of like what he did when he ran away from home as a kid. So he'd go into the woods and just set up camp. His mind was full of anger and rage, and he decided that he was going to release this built-up tension onto others. So in the early morning hours of Friday, August 24th, 1990, Danny decided to break into an apartment. This apartment was shared by 2 university freshmen. They were 18-year-old Sonia Larson and 17-year-old Christina Powell. When he went inside, he found Christina asleep. She was on the downstairs couch. He stood over her briefly, but he didn't wake her up, choosing instead to go and see if there was anyone else upstairs. So he headed upstairs to where Sonia was asleep. He went over to her and he taped her mouth shut. She woke. She scuffled with him, but of course he was going to overpower her. He was stronger. She tried to fight him off, but he pulled out a knife and he just started stabbing her repeatedly until she died. Then he went back downstairs and he taped Christina's mouth shut, which woke her. Then he tied her wrists together behind her back and he threatened her with a knife. He cut off her clothes with this knife and he R-worded her. Then he forced her face down into the ground, and this is where he killed her. He stabbed her 5 times in her back. Then, because that wasn't enough, he went back upstairs and he R-worded Sonia's dead body. What a disgusting, creep. Then he posed the bodies in sexually provocative ways, and he took a shower before he left. A day later, on Saturday, August the 25th, Danny broke into the apartment of 18-year-old chemistry honours student Krista Hoyt. He pried open a sliding door with a screwdriver. As he entered, he realised that Krista wasn't home, so he just hung out in her lounge room. Do you guys call it lounge room, or do you call it living room? Let me know. So he waited, and at 11 o'clock that night, she came home, and he grabbed her, and placed her in a chokehold. Once he got her under control and down on the ground, he duct taped her mouth, and he tied her wrists together behind her back. Then he led her into the bedroom, where he proceeded to cut off her clothes and R-word her. Just like before, he made her lay face down on the bed. Then he stabbed her in her back. He then flipped her body over and he sliced open her abdomen. Oh my God. From pubic bone to breastbone. Just horrible. Then he left. When he got back to his campsite, he had realized that he'd lost his wallet. He thought that he may have dropped it at Krista Hoyt's apartment and decided to go back and check. When he got back there, he went into her bedroom, and this sicko decided that he wanted to add shock value to whoever finds her body. This is where it gets really, really bad. If you didn't think it was bad already, if you thought it was bad already, like, oh my God. So he went over to her and he decapitated Krista. And then he posed her body in a sitting position at the edge of her bed. Then he took her head and he put it on a shelf facing towards her body. Then he left. Sonia and Christina had just moved in together after meeting in the dorms over the summer. They struck up a great friendship and they really enjoyed each other's company. They liked living together. It's just so sad. When Christina's parents hadn't heard from her for a few days, they started to get really worried because she would often call home. And that's when they decided to head over to their daughter's apartment just to make sure that everything was okay. When they arrived, they got no response from their knocks, and they quickly decided to contact the police because they couldn't get in and they needed somebody to check that their child was okay. The police showed up and they broke into the apartment. This is where they discovered a rather gruesome scene. This was not a typical crime scene, and what they found even more disturbing was the posing of the victims' bodies. Sonia's body had been pulled to the edge of her bed. Her legs were draped over. Her arms were above her head, and there was residue on her wrists that indicated duct tape had been used and then removed. As the detectives walked around the apartment, they then found Christina. Her body was in a similar position on the living room floor. This was downstairs. She had also been posed. This is every parent's worst nightmare. It's so sad. It's like we're so proud when they go off to college or university, and it's horrible. These poor parents now knew that their daughter had been killed in a truly horrific way. But that was just the beginning, because 9 hours later, police were called to a more horrifying scene. And this one, it hit hard, because this girl was one of their own. Krista Hoyt was a student and dispatcher with the county sheriff's office. They knew her personally. When she failed to show up for work, the deputies were dispatched to go to her residence to make sure she was okay, because she always showed up to work. She didn't answer the door when they knocked, so one of the deputies decided to go around the back where her bedroom was. He flashed a torch into her window, and that's when he saw her. Decapitated, cut open, they were in shock. But they had to go in. They went in and they found her stabbed, R-worded, and her torso had been cut open. Her killer had posed her on the edge of her bed, sitting up with her feet on the ground and her hands on her thighs. The police later said that the most horrific part was her decapitated head and how it had been placed carefully on the bookshelf and was like looking back at her body. 2 days later, there were 2 more discoveries, and at this point, the killings had attracted widespread media attention. Students in the area were so scared, and they started to take extra precautions. They would change up their daily routines. They would sleep over at each other's apartments or dorms because they thought that they would be safer in a group, which we do assume that we would be safer in a group. Also, this killing spree was happening so early in the fall semester that some students actually withdrew their enrollment or transferred to other schools. Parents were pulling their kids out. No one felt safe anymore. It was terrifying. Then on August the 27th, Danny struck again. This time he broke into the apartment of 23-year-old Tracy Pauls and Manny Taboda. He was also 23. A male, yeah. Maybe Danny didn't realize there was a guy living there. So he used his screwdriver to open up the door, and when he was inside, he found that Manny was asleep in his bedroom. He attacked him first. He stabbed him with a knife over and over and over 30 times. There was a bit of a struggle, but not much. He overpowered him pretty quick. Tracy heard the commotion, so she went down to Manny's bedroom. She saw Danny. She turned around and she ran. She barricaded herself in her bedroom. But Danny went after her, and he was stronger. He broke down the door. He grabbed her and he taped her mouth and wrists. Then he cut off her clothes and R-worded her before turning her over and stabbing her 3 times in her back. He also posed her body like the others, but he left Manny in the same position that he'd actually died in. Tracy and Manny were found the very next day in their apartment after Tracy didn't show up to class. Police believed that Tracy was the intended victim, but when he came across Manny, he had to kill him too. He had to get rid of the guy. You know, if he was going to go after her, he needed to get rid of the guy. Tracy's body, like the previous women, was found posed, while Manny's body remained in the same position that he was killed. Proof that Danny's mark as a killer was reserved for his female victims. The police knew that they were dealing with a monster, but this was a very sick and demented individual that would not only perpetrate this kind of crime, but then set up this kind of crime scene for shock value. With the exception of Manny, all of his victims were petite European brunettes with brown eyes, just like Danny's mum. Although law enforcement initially had very few leads, police did start to identify some suspects. They had 2. One suspect was Edward Lewis Humphrey. He was a University of Florida student. He had a history of mental illness and he had a lot of scars on his face. Apparently he was in a car accident, so he was quite scarred up. He came to police attention after some of the students at the university thought that he may be responsible, which is kind of sad because they're going by how he looks and his mental health. Edward was actually arrested after a physical altercation, okay, not good, with his grandma and held in custody for 5 months until a grand jury refused to indict him on the murder charges. There just wasn't enough evidence. His photo was put in the newspapers, the news. The media went crazy, but he wasn't the killer, and he would eventually be cleared. There were some key similarities between the victims and the way they were killed. In addition to all the women being posed, their bodies had been wiped down with a cleaning agent after they were killed. Police also noticed that the victims' doors bore similar forced entry markings. So it was like from like a screwdriver kind of tool. We know that he used that. And thanks to DNA technology, they knew their main suspect was a secretor and that his blood type was B. Edward the guy that they thought did it, his blood type wasn't B. He wasn't their guy. The task force started combing databases to see if there were any other crimes that had similarities to the one that they had in Gainesville. And the results brought up a cold case from November the 4th, 1989. It was a triple murder case in Shreveport. This is in Louisiana. It resulted in the deaths of 55-year-old Tom Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson. So sad. Investigators learned that Julie's body had also been mutilated, cleaned, and posed. There were no leads for that case. Special Agent Maines noticed from police photos that Julie's left breast had a bite mark on it. Luckily, there was still a well-preserved saliva sample in the evidence box, and when tested, it came back as a B blood type. So police went nationwide in the hunt for their killer, sharing information about the discoveries in the news, which actually resulted in a lead, like the lead. The Grimson family had been attacked in their home. They were preparing their dinner, and he just went in and attacked them all. So afterwards, Julie Grimson's body had been mutilated, cleaned, and posed. Don Maines, an investigator on the case with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, traveled to Shreveport in November of 1990 because of the similarities between the murders committed in Gainesville and the ones committed in Shreveport. Am I saying that correctly? Let me know. They included posing of the victims, this duct tape residue on the victims' bodies, and cleaning agent used to clean the bodies. They tested the body fluids from the perpetrator and found that this person had a B-type blood. B-type blood. Like, come on, you got him, right? No. 3 months earlier, in August 1990, a lady called Cindy heard a news report about a string of killings as she traveled through the Florida Panhandle. The report made her think about a man that she knew. So she contacted the police, and she told them about this man. His name was Danny Rowling. That same Danny. Yeah. Apparently, Danny told her during a conversation that he was a really bad person and that he likes to stick people, stab people. Cindy had met Danny in church, and he began to tell Cindy and her then husband some really disturbing stories. Apparently, Danny would go over to their house like every night. Her husband was getting kind of annoyed with this, and he would just go over and he would be telling them horrific stories. And Cindy's husband, he just one night said, he's got to go. Like, they can't do this anymore. Cindy also told the police that her husband had told her that Danny had told him that he had a problem. Cindy asked, what's Danny's problem? And that's when her husband said that Danny told him that he likes to stick knives into people. At the time, Cindy said that she dismissed these comments because she didn't want to believe that her friend could be responsible for the deaths of the Grimson family. Yeah. So Danny had also told her, this is what he said. He said, one day I'm going to leave this town and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day. Creepy. Stop that. It's weird. So when news of the university students' murders hit the news, Cindy had this gut feeling. She knew who it was. She contacted the police. This gut feeling, it was so right. She knew that Danny was responsible for both sets of homicides. Investigators responded to the tip and they quickly found Danny Rowling. He was actually incarcerated. He'd been arrested on September the 7th, 1990, so not long after he killed these people. He'd robbed a supermarket in Florida. This robbery had been committed 10 days after the bodies of Tracy and Manny were found. Danny was being held in the Marion County Jail, which is 40 miles south of Gainesville. They got his blood type, and it turned out, ding, 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 B blood type. Just like the suspect in both the Grimson family and university students' killings. And once the investigators realized that Danny had multiple convictions for armed robbery, they realized he could have been responsible for the bank robbery that occurred on the day that Krista Hoyt's body was found. That's when they went to the evidence locker. There was a gun, a screwdriver, a bag of money, and cassette player. They'd all been stored. And they listened to the tape that was inside the cassette player. They also found tools matching marks left at the Gainesville crime scenes. The small camp where he had been living, the one that was in the wooded area very close to the apartments, they found it. And they found audio diaries that he had made that alluded to his crimes. So later it was discovered that on August the 5th, 1990, Danny had broke into the home of Janet Frake in Sarasota, Florida. Did I say that right? I hope so. This is where he bound and gagged her with duct tape while he R-worded her, but he did not kill her. That's the one who managed to talk him out of it. With all the evidence that they needed, they then arrested Danny Rolling and charged him with 5 counts of murder, and 4 years after the killings, he was finally brought to trial. He told police that his motive was to become a superstar like Ted Bundy. His words, not mine. I don't consider Ted Bundy a superstar. Then in 1994, before his trial even started, Danny unexpectedly pleaded guilty. He pleaded guilty to all of his charges. I know. That's good for the families, right? They don't have to be dragged through a trial. But didn't he say that he wanted to be a superstar like Ted? Again, his words, not mine. If that were actually true, then he would want to go to trial, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that Ted Bundy loved the fame and attention that he got. He did. In trial, he put on quite the show. People were eating it up. He became super famous for that. I don't like to admit it, but he did. So yeah, maybe he just said that he wanted to be a superstar like Ted for shock value? Or did he mean like the crimes? I don't know. Anyway, the penalty phase of the prosecution started, and court TV showed an interview with Danny's mum. So she was actually in her house at this time of the interview, and Danny's dad could be heard in the background. He was shouting. I know, what a twit. So on April 20th, 1994, Danny Rolling was sentenced to death. He was also seen by doctors, and he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. While he was on death row, why did they do this? He did paintings and sold them. I know. He also got engaged. So his fiancée was a true crime writer, and they actually wrote a book. I know. So this book was called The True Story of the Gainesville Murders in the Killer's Own Words. I wasn't actually going to say what the book was called because I don't want to publicize it, but then I read that a judge had ruled that the profits would actually be seized. The judge invoked the Son of Sam law. So the Son of Sam law is a law designed to keep criminals from profiting from the publicity of their crimes. It's a fantastic law. For example, they can't sell their stories to publishers. So such laws often authorize the state to seize the money that's earned from deals such as books, films, biographies, and whatnot. It's basically anything that makes money from the crime, like paid interviews, that kind of thing. And the money actually goes to the victims' families. Shortly before he was executed in Florida, he actually admitted that he did kill the Grissom family. He had handed a letter with his confession and an apology to a reverend that was there, who then handed it over to police. So his last meal, they always say about the last meal, I know, he had lobster. He didn't say anything before he was executed, which was witnessed by many of the victims' families. Instead, when they asked him, "What are your final words?" he burst out into song. Yep, he did. He sang a rambling gospel number. So I'm not going to sing it, but it went along the lines of none greater than thee, O Lord, none greater than thee. Okay. Is that an actual song? I don't know. So before they turned the mics off and the drugs entered his bloodstream, he just kept on doing this song over and over. It was crazy, but they did cut the mic. So a lot of the time, they killers, they apologize to the families, you know, for what they done. He wrote a letter. I feel like if he was truly sorry, instead of breaking out into song, he would have at least apologized to the victims' families that were there, verbally, not in a letter. It's just a bit annoying. Like, he broke out into song. Who the hell does that? So Danny Rowling was then executed. He was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on October the 25th, 2006. And he was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. He did try to appeal his death sentence just before he died, but he was rejected by the court. So as for how his horrific crimes inspired Scream, I know. Well, in the early 90s, aspiring screenwriter Kevin Williamson was watching a TV special about the Gainesville Ripper. This was at the time of the killings. And that's when he noticed that a window in the house that he was house sitting was open. And he was like, oh my God, I'm feeling a little bit scared and paranoid. Like, somebody can easily just jump through that window and with a knife and kill me. So this was the inspiration for one of the most iconic horror film franchises in history. So he's sitting there, he's watching the TV, and he hears about this crime, and that's his inspiration. And also, when I was researching this case, I was like, the lady who basically caught him was a woman called Cindy. Isn't that the chick's name? Anna Faris. She plays Cindy, right? I'm pretty sure. I haven't actually sat and watched the movie. I feel like it's a little bit cringe, but they say that it's an iconic horror film franchise. It's just not my type. I'm more of a, like, what do I like? I like Annabelle and like The Nun and stuff like that. I'm not really I feel like Scream is just not that good. Oh, did I just piss off some people? I'm sorry. Not really, I'm not sorry at all. It's just, it's not a good movie. Oh no, I just made some enemies, haven't I? I'm sorry guys, but I just prefer like real horror movies. No, I'm just trying to wind you up now. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it there today. A shorter one today because I have been chucking out some pretty long videos lately, and I decided it wasn't going to be as long. Like what? It's like 38 minutes. It's pretty good. All right. Yeah, my last ones have been like an hour and a half, and I decided that I was going to do a shorter one because I kind of needed the break. I am tired. I always say that, right? But talking about death and SA and now animal abuse, it does, you know, it does stuff to your mental health. So sometimes you just need to do a shorter story. It could be a longer story. If I had have dug deeper, I could have made it a longer story, but I think I got the main points out there. Yeah, we walk away from the story realizing that Danny was an idiot and that Scream was a terrible movie. I'm sorry. Am I winding you up? Anyway, apparently I'm feeling like I'm feeling like winding people up. I might actually take that with me when I go back upstairs. Might try and wind my mum up. No, that's just silly. I need to grow up, Kate. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful morning, a day, a night. Now you know where the inspiration for Scream came from. This chap, this terrible human. I feel sorry for him, like, kind of, when he was a kid. I don't feel sorry for him as an adult, but I feel sorry for what he went through as a child. Just sad, right? I wish, like, when the father started showing that he did not want kids, that the mum just picked them up and got the heck out of there, because maybe they would have had a chance. I don't know. But anyway, I'm gone. Okay, have a great morning, day, night, da 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 da, whatever it is where you are. Don't hate on me for not liking Scream. We all have our preferences, right? I am just more of an Annabelle, The Nun, Chucky, Seed of Chucky, Bride of Chucky, all the Chucky movies. Anyway, I'm out. Have a great day. Oh, and what's his name? Freddy Krueger. I know it's a little bit cringe as well, but come on, it's a classic. Anyway, see you later. Ka kite. Bye.